And really delighted to be moderating discussion on scaling policy and finance to unlock the power of the hidden middle. We all know our food systems feed the world, but they're also helping to fuel the climate crisis with driving over 30% of global emissions despite receiving only about 5% of climate finance. So it's one of those examples of how our investments don't really match the scale of the challenge. So today we're going to be looking at how we can find savings in that hidden middle, the often overlooked space between the farm and fork, where we food processed, stored, distributed, and all of the opportunities for cutting emissions in that middle zone. To kick us off, I would love to invite Aya Yatuovo, who's the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Tetra Pak, to set the stage for us.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, it is hot in here, but so maybe this is the kind of real life practice round then how to prepare. So I think you set the scene very, very well for the food systems dialogue today. And maybe one thing that we should all keep in mind when we have the conversation about this very important topic on what are the means of accelerating this transition within the food systems towards a more sustainable future is that this COP is really about solutions and actions and outcomes and real suggestions on what we can take forward from this conversation. I think it's easy to talk about enabling policies and solutions, but it is really hard to actually nail down the examples which have already presented some outcomes and really focus on the tangible actions that we can take in this particular area. So we as Tetra Pak, we are quite well known for our packaging, and maybe less so sometimes known for our food manufacturing solutions that we have. But just to give you a bit of scale of the technologies that we have deployed around the world, there's more than 100,000 units of different kinds of food processing units, a lot of them in the dairy category around the world. So when we talk about the middle part of the food sector or food systems, it really is about storage, distribution. It is about manufacturing or processing capacity sometimes, for instance, in case of post-harvesting, to avoid those losses and really a critical part of the chain. And we believe that we as a company have a particular responsibility to because of our scale of the solutions, and in particular in certain sectors like dairy, we are very prominent. So here, for instance, most of the dairy products have been produced actually with our machinery, and almost 80% of the milk is packed in these wonderful cartons, which allow for a longer shelf life. So really looking forward to great examples, and let's make sure that we take notes then afterwards to see how some great ideas can be taken to the next level. So welcome everybody.
Thank you. And I think we have somebody who will be joining us online. I'd like to introduce Maximo Torero, who's the chief economist from FAO, who is joining us remotely. Maximo, over to you.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you so much, and very nice to be with you. Apologies, I'm not there. I was there a few days ago, but let me briefly give some introduction remarks in 5 minutes, which I have, and how we can accelerate and bring innovations of finance. So first of all of you know the challenge. We have 673 million people in hunger. Agri-food system transformation is needed to achieve the goals, and the quality and quantity of financing is very restricted. Our number is around 4%. It was mentioned 5%, but 4% of climate financing going to the agri-food system, and to smallholders even we're talking of 1% to 2%. So a lot of challenge to be able to resolve that. And the needs, this is just a review of all different estimations of the needs, but they are huge, and we need to work intensively on that. So what is the way? So first is to increase finance to the agri-food system. The second is to ensure that the financing reaches the small-scale food producers and rural communities, and that's the targeting part. we can use government and we can repurpose the current assistance to try to help do that and make it more efficient towards commodities that we believe are more sustainable, and also commodities that will help to increase access to healthy diets. But also we need to have a systematic, localized, rights-based approach to be able to optimize this circle of actions. Now, one of the things that we did in the SOFI is trying to look at the complexity behind countries. No? And because, yes, we need to increase financing, but the risk levels of different types of countries, given their current situation, is different. And we classify them in three types: countries that will have very restricted ability to access to financing, countries that will have a moderate ability to access to financing, and countries that have high ability to access to financing. So on the green area, of course, we can use different mechanisms and innovative financing systems in place, incubate accelerators, impact investment funds, parametric insurance, risk pools, and first loss, so that we can really accelerate the process because markets are well connected, working well there. There is no debt stress, low risk, low level of conflict, easy to operate. But in the other extreme, in the ones which we have limited ability to access financing, then the issue is a little bit more complex. And here we are looking more at grants, we're looking more at low or no interest loans like the IDA countries, for example. And then the issue is how we can optimize, like through the losses and damage fund, or through debt swaps, or special drawing rights or allocation, to be able to support financing mechanisms. And then you have the ones in the middle, where we can do catalytic investments and try to find more market-oriented solutions to that problem. So capturing the heterogeneity of the complexity of the countries outside of the issue of smallholders within the country is very important, because that's what will restrict the access to overall financial resources to the countries, and that's where we believe we need to have an approach which differentiates the type of complexities of the countries. Now, some instruments that can foster agri-food system financing are blended finance. And here in blended finance, our approach, and I will explain a little bit later, is not only blended finance or de-risking through money, but also de-risking through information. And especially when we are targeting areas with smallholders, where there is a lot of lack of information, de-risking through information matters a lot. Debt swaps, I already talked about them. And then, of course, we have other mechanisms that could help to get the pools of resources that are needed to be able to achieve this, like the green social sustainability and sustainable link funds or bonds, and also insurance and partial credit guarantees. And I will explain a little bit what we are doing in that area as an innovation to be able to attract this type of finance. Now, we also need to focus on scaling up and be gender focused, and also on climate finance directed to the agri-food systems. And again, here is where there is a lot of space to understand the importance of climate financing, given that the agri-food systems provides food. Of course, it creates externalities, but is a sector that can adjust and improve efficiencies more even than the energy sector right now. And that's why we need to switch this 4% or 5% of climate financing. But also targeting gender and women farmers is a way that we know that the returns will be higher in terms of the access to these locations. The current finance for food security and nutrition is very fragmented right now, and we need to find ways to improve this. And one of the mechanisms which has been discussed, at least in the leaders meeting, is the Global Alliance Against Hunger, and how we can create convergence on financial instruments on the agri-food system transformation that will come through best practices on the policy basket pillar, but try to find convergence on those things that we know that they work on the agri-food system area outside of the social protection, which is the extreme people of the distribution, that could help us to create that convergence. And that's where we need to work a lot to find ways in which we can create that coordination and that convergence on the financing side, which will come from the IFIs and the NDVs and the private, especially on the IFIs and the NDVs for the most vulnerable and the smallholders. We need to find ways to create that convergence. Now, we have two tools that we are working and two ways of doing this. One is the Hand in Hand initiative, and the second one is the Financing for Truck-Driven Food Crisis Facility. So the first one is trying to find a way to attract private sector financing through reinsurance companies to be able to insure catastrophic risks on the most vulnerable areas. The second one is trying to target interventions based on where we can have smallholder farmers that have an enormous potential, but they are not realizing the potential. Let me just briefly explain the first one. And sorry if the slide is not clear, but the first one basically is trying to gain efficiency in action, quick action, diversify risks, add protection through reinsurance companies, trying to scale up the anticipatory action, which we know the returns 1 to 7, using science-driven trigger indicators that will assure that insurance company can respond to probabilistic triggers, like for example, if there is going to be a drought, the probability of the drought is estimated when there is an extreme value of a drought of 5% probability, then the insurance will trigger and the money will be deployed before the drought happens, and that allows us to get the returns of 1 to 7, but also allow us to scale up the coverage from 1 to 10. So the returns of that is huge. And then of course bring best practices of interventions to be able to do that. Now that requires a level of subsidy, and that's the G7 multi-donor trust fund. But also we need to make it sustainable, because the G7 cannot continue, or the OECD countries cannot continue feeding this fund. And that's where the capital account pays some returns to the capital account, and those returns are shared. Part of them fit into the multi-donor trust fund and allow to resolve the problem. So that's the one that is targeted mostly towards anticipatory action investment for climatic risk and non-climatic risk, like for example conflict. But for sure, reinsurance right now is only on the climatic risk. And we are working on that. We already have 3 policies with Munich Re in place, and that brings investment from the reinsurance companies. The second one is the hand in hand, and the hand in hand initiative, essentially what it does is trying to target through territorial approaches. So we identify areas, looking at the potential of agriculture, looking at what is the efficiency level today, market accessibility in terms of transportation, and that allows us to develop this type of taxonomy that is in the right-hand side. And the areas we focus are the green areas. And those are areas where there is high potential, so you can move out of poverty if you achieve that potential, high inefficiency, so you are not yet there, and a lot of poverty. So the prioritization is through poverty or hunger. Then the goal is to attract investment to those locations to release the constraints that are not achieving, let them achieve that potential. And that's where the investment center of FAO comes and do investment plans. And those investment plans are very concrete, so that they release the constraints to achieve that potential that will move you out of poverty. And basically, we try to attract private sector and other IFIs to the risk, like the IFC or IDB Invest in the case of Latin America, so that we can create that. And that is working very well. We have 80 countries now. We have raised substantial amount of money at this point on these investment plans, around $80 billion, and we keep growing in terms of the coverage of countries. But this type of mechanism will help you to target interventions and be as efficient as possible in the way you deliver these resources, so that you are using the money in the most efficient way, attracting private sector and also attracting efficiency through the IFIs to the risk, with the de-risking also of the information. So you have 3 key legs: the legs of the investment plan, of course, with the government, but the private sector, and the de-risking both financial and through information. So let me stop there, and thank you so much.
All right, well, thank you, Maximo. That really, I think, helps set the stage for the conversation we're having today, and I would like our panelists to come join me on the stage, and we are hoping to have a little time for Q&A, so just to put that in your ear in case you have any questions, to keep them on hand. But please join me in welcoming Ms. Martina Fleckenstein, who's the Global Policy Director for Food at WWF, Mr. Aren Kulenkamp, who's the lead of Innovative Finance and Nature Finance, Mr. Khaled Al-Tawil, who's the Senior Program Coordinator for UN Food Systems Coordination Hub, and then Aya Tuva, who you met earlier, Chief Corporate Affairs for Tetra Pak, and Mr. Ali Bardane, Chief Food Security and Food Systems Unit, UNIDO. So we got a packed stage here today, and representing really perspectives from across different stakeholders. And Aya, you really set the stage on talking about, this COP has been described as the implementation COP, as the action COP, and how we really want to talk about how we can move from these policy ideas to action. And Martina, I'm actually going to start with you. I think that Maximo laid out some of the financial and policy frameworks that can be leveraged for addressing some of these challenges. And WWF works closely with governments and private partners to turn food system commitments into, real change, real action. So from your vantage point, what is getting in the way of being able to scale some of these solutions? Can you hear?
Okay, now you could hear
Turn
me?
it on?
Perfect. Okay, that's solved. Yes, thanks a lot, and also thanks a lot for being here. WWF, and just to mention, food is one of our 4 global programs. Beside biodiversity, beside climate, and beside finance. So you see that we really put food in the center of the topic, and what we want to is really to connect food and climate and biodiversity. And this leads me to my first message. I think we still are too much fragmented. So even in the ministries are not talking to each other. So food is still mostly in the agriculture ministries. It's not in the environment. It's disconnected from health. It's disconnected from trade. So to really get and make progress on food system transformation, it's really urgent to have a better linkage and connection. The second thing, and that was also something when I was listening to Maximo, is we talk about the climate risk. And in the assessments they have shown there is nothing about biodiversity risk. And I think we really have to connect also the risk of biodiversity and the risk of climate, and to get out of this silo thinking. And this leads also on the discussion which is happening at the moment, how to better align the 3 Rio Convention, the one on climate, the one on biodiversity, and the one on land. And this is an urgency, because at the end we are talking up countries, we are talking up regions, we are talking about landscapes. And at the landscape, we should not make the difference between if it's on mitigation, adaptation, and on biodiversity. The second point, which also was mentioned, is the limited access, especially for smallholder farmers, for cooperative, for women, for young people, local communities, indigenous communities to finance. It's very easy to give the great grants like the GCF, the CHEF to the government, but how to really reach the smallholders on the ground? I think this is really something we need to find solution in the next years if we want really to successfully implement the biodiversity and the climate agendas. And we also have still weaknesses in measurement and accountability frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. And Aren, you are deep in the world of innovative finance, and when you look at food systems through a financial lens, where do you see some of the powerful levers that we could pull that we're not yet pulling? And then maybe you can also talk a little bit about the role of partnerships, like you have this regenerative school meals initiative with the Rockefeller Foundation, and where you see that fitting into helping to scale these solutions.
Yes. Can you hear me? Is this
Yes.
on?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. Well, firstly, thank you for this opportunity to participate in this event. And I really kind of want to build on what Martina already said, which is the importance of bringing the food agenda into other ministries. And that's really something that we at Nature Finance have been dedicating a lot of our time to, looking at food systems transformations through the Ministries of Finance lens, specifically from a standpoint of sovereign financing. So how a government funds itself and acquires the resources to cover its budgetary needs. And here, of course, the credit ratings are a really important consideration. So these are the international agencies that assign scores to different countries, which then in turn determines the cost of borrowing. And food systems, as the name says, they are systemic, which to me, means macro-critical, which means they are relevant to the creditworthiness of a country. So transformations in the food systems have a direct link to how investors perceive countries. And this creates big upside and downside risks. So on the downside, of course, with climate change, as climate shocks disrupt food productions, these have ripple effects through the macroeconomy, which then impact the credit ratings. We have plenty of examples already, and the trend is towards more and more sort of integrated, interwoven climate stress and sovereign debt stress. So we are in the midst of a sovereign debt crisis, while at the same time facing escalating climate shocks. But that then also creates an opportunity. So on the upside, making food systems more resilient should translate into better creditworthiness. That means that if your supply chains are more resilient, you're able to export more, you're able to generate more foreign exchange with which to pay your external creditors. These are all considerations that the Ministry of Finance really cares about. And so to the extent that we can align the objectives of the Ministry of Agriculture to this sovereign financing question, you can really get the Ministries of Finance's attention, and they're the ones that in many cases control the purse strings. And so then the question is, of course, once you've made the case to them that sustainable regenerative food systems are a resilience asset for the country as a whole, the question is, well, how can you stimulate that transformation? And this is where the partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation, the World Bank, and Bankers Without Boundaries comes in. So we've put together a package around regenerative school meals. So very simply, feeding children healthy food. Politically, it's very palatable. It sells very well. We have plenty of examples of this currently around the world where presidents have staked a lot of their political capital on school feeding programs. And we are encouraging them to say you should pair that with interventions to improve the resilience of food systems. So school meals are an important institutional demand lever. It's a large pocket of demand, the entire school system. That's a lot of purchasing of food. And there's an opportunity here, of course, through their budget to be more selective in their procurement processes, to source locally, to source from regenerative agriculture producers, and to that way kind of stimulate that transformation. And one way that we're trying to implement this in sort of 4 pilot countries that we're starting with, Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, and Indonesia, is through, for instance, a debt for nature, or rather debt for school meals swap. So the country makes a commitment to achieving certain levels of school feeding, which many countries already have institutionalized. It's politically very sticky, and so that creates an opportunity to sort of present it to international investors to then basically buy expensive old debt with cheap new debt that has been sort of guaranteed in some form or fashion. And the savings from that conversion can then be used to help catalyze the regenerative transition in those countries. So money that can be set aside for a long period of for school. So I'll leave it there. Happy to chat a bit more about other programs that we're doing with the Rockefeller Foundation. Thank you.
Fascinating. Sounds like a lot of win-win-wins in that, and then also educating school children and families about this that can help in other ways. So Khalid, I'd like to bring you in, and Maximo talked a little bit about how FAO has been working on some new financial instruments, the FCFC facility, hand in hand. Which tools do you see as most promising for really unlocking capital in this hidden middle? And maybe you can share some examples of where you see this working on the ground.
You hear me? Okay. Okay. Let me start with just one small story. We had the Food System Summit a few months ago in Addis Ababa, and I think every leader or every minister spoke about how food system is a priority to the country. But when you come to the budget and financing, we have a gap between what is considered sometimes as an aspiration and how much money is committed. I come from the Food System Coordination Hub. We work with countries in order to help transform food systems. So we work with different partners, we work with the UN system, we work with the private sector and civil society. If I have to report 3 key messages from my side. One, from the Food System Summit, financing is coming as the most important underutilized factor. Without financing, food system transformation is impossible. Many countries, especially in the developing countries in the South, are doing what they can do in terms of governance, in terms of taking the right policies, but without financing, this is not happening. We know that we don't have more than 13% of ODA assistance going to financing. Less than 4 to 5% from climate financing is going to food system. So we don't have enough financing. How in the hub we are helping to build this? 2 main tracks. One is financing intelligence. In many countries, they don't know how much money is going to food systems. And with IFAD and the World Bank, we developed a tool which is called the 3FS, which measure how much funding is really allocated to food system transformation. And by giving these numbers, it is really a kind of eye-opener for decision makers, because food system transformation is the task of the Ministry of Agriculture. But those who decide how much money we'll put for food system transformation is mainly either the President or the Minister of Finance. So by knowing if we are putting enough money or not, this is very key transformation. It is implemented in 3 countries, and we are upscaling now to 15 countries. The second important intervention from the Food System Hub is through the SDG fund. And even with catalytic funding, 15 million for the last round, we managed to mobilize catalytic funding of more than 150 million. And this is really going in sectors including the hidden middle, which we believe is one of the important intervention areas, not only from economic point of view, but because it can support better food security, better nutrition, it creates jobs, it can decrease inequality, and these are all important connecting factors in the SDGs. But we are now having also the second round of the SDG fund, and we will have more funding this time. We expect that this can result in more than 250 catalytic funding. So the hub is hosted by FAO. Maximo explained very well how the hand-in-hand works, how the food financing facility. From our side, we work on systemic approaches to food system transformation. Martina also mentioned the connection between food system and the climate. In the hub, we have the Food System Climate Action Conversion Initiative, and we have helped 20 countries in aligning food system transformation with climate policies. This is something that don't expect that it will happen automatically. In many countries, especially in the developing world, food system transformation, agricultural policies are being developed and being implemented in isolation from climate change. By bringing them together, we are not only having a more systemic, successful approach, but we are also increasing efficiency and decreasing cost, enhancing the return on investment. So these are 2 or 3 messages that I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, and I think that really underscores the importance of making sure ministers of finance really are bought into investing in these areas. So, Aya, you've talked a little bit about what Tetra Pak is doing and the role that you play, particularly in this hidden middle in the value chain. Where do you really see the role that private sector plays in this, and how do you see policies and these other financial investments being able to drive more sustainable, climate resilient practices, and where you think that there's more room for public-private collaboration?
Does this work? Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, it's a big question, of course. Maybe I'll just bridge a bit on some of the topics that the colleagues were saying, because I think when we, for instance, if we look at the hidden middle and the role of kind of enabling companies in that, you will really see that policy is super important. So is financing. But in the case of the system, it's majority of the companies that actually are the processors in the food system, or they are the distributors, or the companies that provide some kind of storage, they tend to be SMEs. And colleagues here, they touched upon some of the challenges in terms of government actions, that the governments work very much in silo. And in fact, one of the things that we've been asking in Europe, for instance, is that there should be a DG food, which looks at things holistically, and looking at the planetary boundaries, for instance, and the food systems at the center of it, you would get a very holistic view of things. I think the private sector, there are different types of roles for different types of companies. And because we are so predominant in certain categories, we see that we really have many pathways where we can take action, but all of them are policy driven. And I think that's where the kind of public-private partnerships and collaboration across the value chain really becomes a reality. So I can give you some examples. So if we look at just basically, let's take the dairy sector. So of course, dairy plays a key role in terms of livelihoods, high protein, kind of derivatives as well as milk being in a key role, but at the same time the environmental footprint is very challenging. So while there may be need to decarbonize the sector and work in the also on the processing side of it and all that, there's also a lot of socio-economic things to consider, and also opportunities with technology to actually make more of the raw milk. And this, instead of government policies that just look at the environmental issues, as we see in some countries, one should have more empowering socio-economic policies that support that development. And one thing that nobody has yet mentioned is also, of course, the subsidies in the sector. So if we want to drive kind of better, let's say that protein diversification is a good example. So if we want to drive protein diversification, the subsidies currently on animal proteins, they basically stop a lot of the development and R&D of plant-based proteins to really scale up with innovative technologies. So we as a company, we have collaborations with academia to develop such technologies, but it's very difficult for those startups to scale up. So I think this is where the kind of cross-sector collaboration with academia involved, but governments having a key role in driving this, and then policy and financing supporting this transition would be some examples.
Thank you. And then, so Ali, bringing you in, I had mentioned that where a financing mechanism, perhaps blended or public-private, has really successfully, unlocked growth for this hidden middle to help solve this challenge.
Thank you. Well, there's a lot to reflect on based on the previous discussions, but maybe let me just be specific on my answer. I think I will start with what Maximo hinted on, that seems to be lots of funding investment initiatives happening around us. There seems to be money, but I think he mentioned about fragmentation and repurposing the investments and where the money should go. And I think this is an important point that we should just focus on and think of how we go about it. And from UNIDO side, being as an agency in the UN system that promotes industrialization, and when we look at the food system, I think there is an industrialization element in the food systems. And we believe that as we speak, planning for investments, for policies, for de-risking, there's one fact in the food systems that SMEs, our investors, are taking decisions and moving. They're not necessarily waiting for investments or waiting for de-risking to make their next choice on investing in a machine or investing in a solution or adapting a new technology. This is where we are trying to bring the discussion from the overall food system transformation dilemma into actual concrete investments on the ground. And we think the SMEs could be the ones who can make the accelerated transformation. SMEs are by nature entrepreneurs. They see the opportunities, they jump on it, they just need guidance, and they need not really the money as much, or unlocking some solutions for them. Solutions are not only the cash, solutions could be the technology, the market opportunity, and this is where in UNIDO operations we try to find where exactly the entry point for the SMEs in certain sectors could make the benefit and do the accelerated transformation. When it comes to examples, what maybe comes to my mind, and whatever examples we bring at UNIDO will not be at scale like the examples FAO colleagues they bring, because they look at the holistic approach when they are promoting or advocating for unlocking finance. But when we take a supply chain perspective and we take a hidden middle perspective, there's a lot can be done. There are some interesting cases, solutions, pilots that they worth to be looked at and repurpose whatever investments and funding into these really working solutions and solutions that are making big impact. So let me give you two quick examples. One is actually market-driven and one is a climate-driven. So market-driven, if you secure a market opportunity for any supply chain, it will react immediately. It will find the money, it will find the solution, and it will run. And I don't think they will wait for us until we find a policy that will help them out. It will help, but they will not wait for it. What comes to my mind is the value addition in the fresh fruits that ends up frozen into the dairy supply chain globally. That sounds to be as simple in technical terms, just frozen some strawberries, it ends up in the global supply chains in the dairy sector with the fruit yogurts. If you think how this was transforming 5 different supply chains in 5 different countries with private investments. They were not looking for climate financing. They did not look for de-risking. They saw the market opportunity. What they need actually is support to expand the markets and work on the supply chain. So that's just an example how market power could drive acceleration in the food system transformation. The second example is a climate-driven. And what comes to my mind is a project or program that we do in Africa on energy efficiency. So trying to help SMEs to decarbonize, to deploy energy efficiency technologies, clean tech technologies for the sake of climate. But guess what? With simple grants, you could build business case and bankable projects to deploy solutions that goes beyond energy efficiency. And I think these, we would recommend the climate financing organizations, the colleagues from FAO, to look at these working examples that could be scaled up. So I will conclude by, let's start by scaling up existing solution, existing practices that the private sector, and I mean the private sector, the SMEs on the ground, and their partners in the private sector in the world. Help them out to accelerate while we are sorting out the policy framework. That just will be my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. So I did say we will open up to Q&A, so, but I do want to do another round with the panelists before we do so. And we're here in Belém, and one of the great things about COP is bringing stakeholders together that aren't always in the same room. There's probably other stakeholders that should be here too that are not. But when we think about really being able to take a lot of the discussions and the policies and the frameworks that are being discussed here, out into the real world and making these turn into actual actions, I'd love to hear from each of you kind of your advice for people in this room or tuning in online on what you would like to see the public and private sectors do to really take this and scale it, scale the ideas that are working and being able to take some of this, the ideas to action as this COP is hoping to do. And see, I will go down the row here and start with you, Arend.
I would just reinforce the comment that I made earlier, which is that we need to elevate this agenda to the sovereign financing domain, because you can have tremendous impact and influence over the broader policy-making apparatus by showing the link between food transformation, especially around regenerative food systems, resilient food systems, and the country's cost of capital. And to have the private sector really internalize that linkage and see other opportunities of investing in these transformations as a way of improving the cost of capital for the government, which then has these ripple effects for everybody else. So just as a reminder, the country's cost of capital, its interest rate, is the interest rate that we all essentially carry at the end of the day. So that would be my message. Thank you.
Compelling argument. Aya?
I think I'll go for something a bit simpler. I don't know if it's equally elegant, but so our home government is the Swedish government, and we've just had some discussions with the Swedes about the kind of agri-food sector and tangible kind of actions that we could do, and I think having progressive kind of developed economies, having a kind of a projects underway which are tangible, measurable, and not just charitable projects like the Swedish government is now doing with SIDA, which is their development agency, collaborating with UNIDO, for instance, which are very, very concrete things and with a simple portfolio of financing instruments, and where you can actually kind of show immediate results, and I think that is maybe something that has been missing, and we've been discussing it a lot, for instance, in our companies, that we participate in a lot of initiatives which are, be it the World Business Council for Sustainable Development or many platforms where the results are coming 2030, 2050 or something. But if we have very practical things where we have the government, public-private partnerships, I'm a firm believer in multilateralism as well. So let's go and get our feet dirty and or hands dirty, and maybe feet as well, and deliver those immediate results, because those are needed now.
Yeah, Martina.
Yeah, thanks. A great discussion here. I just come back. We had as WWF. We had organized a pre-COP conference in Santos where we brought together also the private sector, government, science, NGOs to discuss the next step. And I think one thing is what I mentioned already is we had to get out of this fragmentation. And one way to get out of the fragmentation is really to consider what's happening at the landscape. At the landscape, you really bring together the biodiversity challenges and opportunities, the climate challenges and opportunities, and you have all the people who are living in this landscape. Yeah? And this is exactly what you mentioned, is we have to bring these things on the ground, and there is a lot of knowledge available. It's really scaling up the knowledge. I think we have the ingredients. Yeah? It's not required to invent a lot of new technologies. I think we have the ingredients, we have a lot on technologies. It's more the implementation on the ground, and we also have the tools which are available. And if I would get out here, also our wish is really to now look at the implementation of government commitments, which are the national determined contributions, which are still not a lot available, but hopefully they will come. We have the biodiversity strategies which needs to be implemented, and it's great to see the energy of the private sector to step in. And maybe one last thing is, and that's what I was always when I was sitting in this discussion, I'm more with the biodiversity and climate background, is we need to find a joint language. Very often the language of the finance sector is difficult to understand from the climate and the biodiversity, and the other way around. Yeah, so we have our acronyms, we have our terminologies. We also have to solve this problem in really communicate and have one language, what we want to do on the ground, how to strengthen this stakeholder, but also especially cooperatives. I think that's something, and I think what UNIDO is doing, I like your work, by the way, very much.
I think that's such a good point. The acronyms alone can maybe scare people off from talking to each other. So, yeah, Ahmed.
Yes.
Yeah.
You hear me? Okay, so I think we need to consider a kind of climate-sensitive public-private partnership. When it comes to the public sector, we know also from the feedback we get from the food system national conveners that on the ground the investment opportunity is not very conducive to the engagement, especially with the hidden middle, small and medium enterprises. So government have a role to play. But on the other side, the private sector also have a responsibility. We have a lot of discussion about corporate accountability, how the private sector investment can not only achieve profit, which is legitimate objective, but also have social, environmental, and health positive consequences. Both together should go hand in hand. Conducive environment for investment of the hidden middle, the small and medium enterprises, but there is a more responsible role of the private sector is also key.
Ali?
And I think I will continue exactly where Khalid ended. And I think from our experience working with the private sector, and as UNIDO, we work with so many sectors. We work on the cement industry, we work on the critical minerals, as well as the food. So I would really support that we managed to unlock the private sector to come down, to make their hands, and they're already dirty in the field, but we managed to unlock their potential to come and join development programs. We were not successful with all the private sector. I will not mention names here, but I think the example of Tetra Pak is a solid example how you could unlock Tetra Pak potential, not only to think of their commercial interest in the supply chain, but to go beyond. I think we still need to unlock the policy and the financing systems. These are things are difficult to do, and my advice will be let's not wait for this to be unlocked. Continue to unlock more private sector. As you mentioned, we have the solutions, we have the tools, we have the money, we have the technology. It's not a rocket science to bring it down to the hidden middle and do accelerated transformation while the policymakers are trying to figure out what to do.
Could I add one thing? And I think that you mentioned the subsidy topic, and I think this is an urgent topic, yeah. And maybe the private sector could put more speed on this than the government. That would be amazing because it's really something we have to repurpose the subsidy and to that they go away from harmful subsidies. And governance, are sometimes very slow.
Yeah, it can be political too. Well, when I'm here, there's taking a lot of collaboration, whether it's between ministries, between public-private sector, between different stakeholders, really coming together. I do want to see if we have any questions in the audience just around the financing gap or target investments in the middle, policy support required, or any examples you might have to bring in. Yes, I see. And then maybe we can get a microphone we can pass out. Oh, I can. They're wired up, so you'll have to. We're all friends here.
Just a little bit. I suppose the question is about language and having to come together to align. We did a paper on food, and it was actually more of a finance paper. But when we got it reviewed by people working in the food space, they said, if you use that word, no one's going to read this paper. If you use this acronym, people are going to completely dismiss everything you're saying, even though we were looking at blended finance tools, not looking at food necessarily in any great depth. And I'm wondering, is there any way to overcome the fact that the food sector has been around so long that there's sort of a whole lot of unpacking that needs to be done in sort of the build-up of tension between language and acronyms and all of that mess? And is there any progress on unpacking that, do you think?
Yeah, you want to go for that? Or Ali?
I will only say that the only language that everyone understands is the field language. Go down, speak to the supply chain actors, everybody will understand everybody. Let's not confuse them with what we write in our publications.
So we need some translators. Anyone else want to?
No, I just like your approaches, and I think it's something to think about, because there is something which we need to each other to better understand, and to get away from the acronyms and the whole system. Maybe an idea to follow up on this and to see what could we do. I don't have the answer. Sometimes we don't have, but I think it's about dialogues. It's about talking to each other. It's events like this, yeah. At a COP, it's a biodiversity or a climate COP. People come together and discuss this. I think also it's great we have now here finance days, yeah. We have food days, so we made a huge progress already to connecting also these, let's say, food and finance communities. And that's, for example, what we do with WWF, where we have now finance and food as a priority in our 4-year program for the next year. So thank you for your question.
That's great. Any other questions in the audience? Maybe there's a role for a food finance translator, if anyone thinks they can carve out a career niche in that space.
Maybe AI could help.
And AI, I was thinking that myself, ask ChatGPT to talk in one language or the other. Well, I know we do have a few more minutes, but we're going to have some closing remarks, but just wanted to see if there were any other issues you thought we missed today, or things that you would like the crowd to leave with on how we can really make progress on addressing this hidden middle in, whether it's from a climate perspective, a market perspective, a policy perspective. Any final thoughts from anyone on the panel? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe one thing which often gets disregarded in the broader food system transformation discussion is the circular economy and the policies in that domain that could really move the needle. Not just food loss and waste, but more understanding that also the similar way that in many circular economy kind of theories, be it any material kind of flows, you start from the design of the product and you kind of maximize the resource use and all that. Similar discussions around food and the use of maximizing the use of the precious resources that take all the nature's ingredients, soil health and all that. I mean, that would probably be a topic to discuss both in the climate conversations as well as biodiversity and all of that. And just an idea.
Well, I mean, when it comes to language, and also everyone speaks the language of food, right? We all have to have food. So at the end of the day, I think it makes a lot of these climate challenges that are described in policy or economic terms feel very real and tangible. Martina?
No, I was a little bit reflecting, and I think we have really speed up with the topic on food system transformation. Calif, what you mentioned, we had the Food System Summit in 2021, and we started to have food at this huge, the Rio Convention conferences now since 4 years. Yeah, I think we have really speed up on the topic, and we should not give up this speed. Yeah, we are looking for 2030, where we all these wonderful targets, the SDGs, the NDCs, and everything. And I think it's really very important to keep the power and the energy we have. And we have now all the national pathways. So there is a lot of, and as I mentioned, the ingredients are there. Now we have to bring this together, and it's great to be here with the private sector, with the finances. And I think we should take this as something also encouraging away from this climate codes, where the official negotiations are very often super slow and frustrating. But I think everything which is happening also in these presidency programs is really encouraging and have to be carried forward. So it's more an optimistic input from my side.
Yeah.
Okay, no, I wouldn't be very worried about disagreement on some of the terminologies. As Ali said, I think the practitioners on the ground understand what does it mean. But also for the food sector, we need to keep realizing that this is a very sensitive sector. It touches on something very vital, a lot of money, a lot of interest, impact on climate change, impact on people's livelihood. So having controversy sometimes even healthy to have this. One point answering to your question, I think the health outcomes of the hidden middle is something that really we need to focus on. The small and medium enterprises in developing countries, what kind of food they are producing, and how can the governments, through national policies and the framework, help guide this process to be producing food that is in line with their health requirement and better supporting better nutrition. We know that we have at least 2.3 billion who don't afford healthy diet, and the majority are in the global south. How can we make healthy diet more affordable? I think the government cannot do this alone. They need to work with the private sector and especially the hidden middle.
Yeah, good.
Maybe just one thing to add, which I didn't get to earlier. It's about the importance of blending different policy agendas. So in the work that we do, we often talk about triple materiality: social, economic, and environmental. And for me, the example of regenerative school meals really encapsulates all three of those. There's an environmental impact from food system transformation through regenerative agriculture. There's a social dimension of feeding children healthy food. And of course, as I was saying, sort of the economic impact of building resilience through supply chains. So I'll leave it with that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, before we wrap up, I would like to invite Ali to give some closing remarks. You want to stay seated here? Okay.
It's going to be quick. Well, it's not easy to conclude something really comprehensive. I think we've touched on a number of important issues from the financing or the policy or the market level. So I would maybe listening to Maximo also gave us a nice overview and maybe also some updates from the leaders' discussions about the global alliance that Brazil is pioneering. So I think also he touched on the fragmentation and repurposing of funding and investments. And I think the last slide he had was important. I was looking at this document yesterday. The QR code was there. It's I think it's was published this year from FAO. It's worth to look at and take it from the slide again into action. I think that the discussions today, we took it from the overall system transformation and the financing for the whole food system to the lack of responsibilities or mandate among different ministries, the lack of biodiversity in the discussions as well. That tells us how complex it is to connect all the dots together and try to come up with one policy, one action. So we need to appreciate how complex the discussion around transforming food systems. I think Khalid gave us efforts on what they have been doing as a coordination hub, and I know how painful stories he can tell us about. Very difficult to bring stakeholders within one government around one plan. Imagine you expand it to different stakeholders. So I'm just saying this to conclude that it's complex, but at the same time, when we look at the supply chain actors, we look at the hidden middle, we look at the private sector, we see hope that the things can be done quickly, can be accelerated. The question, how do we link what the private sector at country level, at global level is doing and link it with the policy level? I don't know how this could be done, but there are some examples. Maybe we need to attract the attention of the financing institutions to take some time, break, and look at these things and repurpose and realize happening is just to join the action. I would encourage everyone to look where there's an action happening in a supply chain or in a public-private partnership and join. Don't ask the questions, just join, figure out the questions while you're joining, because that's, again, message to the private sector. If you ask too many questions before you engage, it will be too late to engage. Just try to join and answer the question as you go. And that's maybe in a nutshell. And one maybe thing I took out of the discussion, that maybe we are saying less than 4%, less than 5% climate financing going there. Is it only climate financing the problem? Or we should look at the financing in a comprehensive way, because there are lots of money there. Climate financing is a crowded space. Everybody here in this area running after climate financing. So I don't have, again, a conclusion for this, but food for thought. Again, thank you so much on behalf of UNIDO as well for being with us today. And thanks to you as well.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the complexity makes it challenging, but I mean, there's lots of opportunities for everyone to get involved. So please join me in thanking our panelists for their time today. And thank you all for joining.